On September 11, 2001, the United States, one of the most powerful nations in the world, was attacked on its own soil. The terrorist attacks targeted New York City and Washington, D.C., both of which are major symbols of America's economic, military, and political power. However, the attempt to attack America had been planned for nearly 10 years by the group Al-Qaeda. The mastermind behind the planning and coordination of the terrorist operation was a man named Khalid Mohammed. Khalid Mohammed was born in Pakistan, but he grew up and lived in Kuwait. He later went to study in the United States and graduated with a degree in mechanical engineering in 1986. After finishing his studies, he left the United States and traveled to the Khyber province in Pakistan to join the Mujahideen in their fight against the Soviet army in Afghanistan. It was there that he worked with Khalid Abdul Mohammed and Osama bin Laden. Khalid Mohammed had already planned an attack on the World Trade Center in New York back in 1993. At that time, his nephew, Ramzi Youssef, carried out the attack by driving a truck loaded with explosives into the underground parking garage of the Twin Towers and detonating it remotely. That attack killed 6 people and injured more than 1,000 others. But the attack failed to bring down the World Trade Center. After the attack, Al-Qaeda publicly claimed responsibility, declaring that although they had not succeeded, there would come a day when their efforts would be achieved. Khalid Mohammed continued developing a new plan to attack the United States again. This time, instead of using car bombs, the plan involved hijacking passenger airplanes and crashing them into strategic targets. Khalid Mohammed first presented this idea to Osama bin Laden in 1996. But at that time, bin Laden showed little interest because Al-Qaeda was undergoing major changes. They had been expelled from Sudan and were relocating to Afghanistan. 2 years later, in 1998, Osama bin Laden publicly declared war on the United States. He then began launching attacks on 2 U.S. embassies, one in Kenya and one in Tanzania. It was around this time that bin Laden approved the plan to begin preparing the terrorist attacks on American soil. After receiving approval, Khalid Mohammed began recruiting volunteers to become suicide attackers for his plan. The groups selected included extremist students living in Germany, and the main leader among them was Mohammed Atta. Mohammed Atta was an Egyptian who graduated from Cairo University and went to Germany in 1992 to study urban planning in Hamburg. It was in Hamburg that Atta became a strict follower of radical Islamic teachings after spending time in 2 mosques known for their extremist ideology. His extremist beliefs became even stronger after the Gulf War, and especially after the Oslo peace agreement between Israel and Palestine. These ideas eventually led Mohammed Atta to leave his studies. In 1999, he and his companions left Germany and traveled to Afghanistan to receive training at Al-Qaeda camps. There, Atta's group caught the attention of Osama bin Laden and Khalid Abdul Mohammed, who saw their potential for the planned attacks on the United States. Bin Laden chose Atta's group because they were educated, understood Western culture and lifestyle, spoke English well, and most importantly, were students living in Western countries, making it much easier for them to obtain visas to enter the United States. It was known that in the early 2000s, the group led by Mohammed Atta, consisting of 19 members, most of them Saudi Arabian citizens, received visas and began traveling in small groups into the United States one after another. Among them, 4 members enrolled in flight schools in Florida and California to learn how to fly airplanes. In December 2000, these 4 terrorists completed their flight training. Then in August 2001, about 3 weeks before September 11th, Mohammed Atta received the order about their attack targets. The World Trade Center Twin Towers, symbol of America's economy, the Pentagon, symbol of military power, the Capitol building, symbol of political power. The 19 terrorists were divided into 4 groups. Each group had one trained pilot. Their mission: 2 groups would attack the World Trade Center, 1 group would attack the Pentagon, 1 group would target the Capitol building morning of September 11, 2001, at 6:45 a.m. at Boston International Airport. 10 terrorists in 2 groups prepared to board 2 separate flights. American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles, United Airlines Flight 175, also from Boston to Los Angeles. At the same time, the other 2 groups of terrorists prepared to board. United Airlines Flight 93 from New York to San Francisco. American Airlines Flight 77 from Dulles International Airport near Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles. At 8:19 a.m., about 20 minutes after Flight 11 took off, the FBI received calls from 2 flight attendants reporting that the plane had been hijacked. On board Flight 11, Mohammed Atta, the leader, took over the cockpit after attacking the 2 pilots. He told the passengers to remain calm and claimed he would return the plane to the airport. At 8:40 a.m., the U.S. Air Defense Command ordered fighter jets to intercept Flight 11, but the jets had not yet taken off. At 8:46 a.m., Flight 11, a Boeing 767 carrying 92 people, was crashed by Mohammed Atta into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. About 15 minutes later, at 9:03 a.m., as cameras and people around the world watched the burning first tower, another plane, Flight 175, a Boeing 767 with 65 people on board, was flown by the second terrorist group into the South Tower. At this point, no one had any doubts. This was not an accident. It was a coordinated terrorist attack on the United States. President George W. Bush. At the moment the attacks happened in New York, President George W. Bush was visiting an elementary school in Florida. At 9:05 a.m., while he was sitting in a classroom listening to students read, Andrew Card, the White House Chief of Staff, whispered to him that another plane had hit the second tower and that America was under attack. Bush remained seated for a short time to avoid causing panic in front of the cameras. About 30 minutes later, he gave a brief statement confirming that the country was under terrorist attack. He then boarded Air Force One and left Florida. Other attacks at the same time. Flight 77, a Boeing 757 with 64 people, was hijacked and crashed into the Pentagon at 9:37 a.m. Flight 93, which departed from New Jersey to San Francisco, was hijacked and directed toward Washington, D.C., with the target being the Capitol building. After the Pentagon was attacked, Washington, D.C. was on full alert. Staff working at the White House, the Capitol, and other important locations were immediately evacuated. High-ranking government officials, including the Vice President, were moved to the underground emergency facility beneath the White House, a place built specifically for situations involving possible nuclear attacks. From the underground command center, Richard B. Cheney called President George W. Bush, and both agreed that the president should remain aboard Air Force One, protected by fighter jets until it was absolutely certain that it was safe for him to return to Washington. At the same time, the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, decided to shut down U.S. airspace completely. All planes on the ground were ordered not to take off, and thousands of planes already in the air were instructed to land immediately at the nearest airport. United Airlines Flight 93. On Flight 93, several passengers called their families to tell them about the hijacking they were experiencing. During these phone calls, passengers learned what had already happened in New York. They realized that the terrorists were not hijacking the plane to make demands. Their only goal was to crash the plane into a target, just like what had happened to the World Trade Center. Understanding this, the passengers made a collective decision. They would sacrifice their own lives to try to retake control of the plane. At 9:57 a.m., the passengers began fighting back against the terrorists. As they attempted to break into the cockpit, the hijackers, knowing they could no longer reach their intended target, decided to crash the plane intentionally. Flight 93, a Boeing 757 with 44 people on board, crashed into a field in Pennsylvania, killing everyone on the plane. Buildings collapse in New York. Meanwhile, in New York, at 10 a.m., the North Tower of the World Trade Center collapsed. About 30 minutes later, the South Tower also collapsed. In total, the 4 coordinated terrorist attacks at the World Trade Center in New York, the Pentagon, and in Pennsylvania caused the deaths of nearly 3,000 people. It was the largest terrorist attack in history, and it marked the beginning of a new era, often called the post-9/11 world. These events became the starting point of 2 major 21st century wars: the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq. And they also contributed to the rise of extremist groups in the Middle East, such as the Islamic State, ISIS, in later years.